asking candidate number 7, Zhina.
Oh, wow.
Please pick your card.
Yes.
And here is your question. How did speech communication shape you as an individual, and how did it influence your outlook in society? Diba?
Wow, thank you, Steve Jco. Pero thank you for that wonderful question.
Don't forget, because this is a podcast you will never regret.
Because in here, we talk it out all out with SPECAbout what?
Hey everyone, a warm welcome to everyone listening and watching our podcast. I know it's the spooky season, but hopefully we give you a treat-filled show that suits your tastes.
Surely, everyone is in it for a taste. Never joke lang, everyone is in it for a treat. So we're here to take away all your hunting sim workload. So this is the perfect time, di ba, to take a deep breath and feel.
Tama. Enough na dyan sa mga nakakatakot na requirements. Kaya naman, we're here to be your company throughout these spooky and exhausting times. Siya nga pala, I'm Jco, everyone's favorite donut dude and geeky extraordinaire.
And I'm Zhina, minsan Zina, ang inyong resident chinita charmer. And this is SPECAbout what?
That's right. It's our first episode and tamang-tama kasi we've reached the midpoint of the semester. At ang masasabi ko lang ay, grabe, kailangan ko talaga tong chikahan session na to. Sobrang pagod na ako kasi I'm juggling 15 units, work also, blended learning, and all of that under the interpersonal and instructional track. And thesis sem ko pa, so punong-puno na, di ba? Di ba kaklase kita sa thesis class? Right?
Tama yan, tama. Pero, Jco, kami rin dito sa Over the Backod, pagod. Pero super intersectional talaga ng struggles ng students. Kasi, ikaw nasa instructional ka, ako nasa ibang bakod. Pero, same, financial crisis, being broke, just ko, mass transportation, pagko-commute, ikaw, kakauwi mo lang di ba? Tapos, more than that, yung systemic na educational na problema natin. Too many to mention. Baka maalala lang natin lahat yung papers under our subjects, which is me, para sa akin, rhetoric and performance, na ito rin ang aking AOC. Ano bang AOC?
Ang AOC yung area of concentration. Kumaga parang ito yung major in ganyan. O diba, parang Bachelor of Arts in Speech Communication, major in ganyan.
Major in.
Diba, it's very, very fancy sounding. And that's the reason why yung mga discourse natin as students in speech communication, puro substance talaga. So for example, para sa akin, ang AOC ko ay interpersonal and instructional comm. So kumbaga, we study relationships. I think one of the most memorable classes ko yung subject namin on relationships. Pinag-aaralan namin what makes a breakup, diba? So na-rationalize ko pa yun, diba? Yeah, so may organizational comm din, meron din konting marketing even, and of course, there's instructional comm as well kung saan namin pinag-aaralan yung paggawa ng modules, diba?
True yan. Pero somehow, related yung 4 strands, diba? Sa kung ano nga ba yung tinitignan natin as a speech comm or sa society, for example. Pero as someone naman who chose yung other side of speech comm, which is rhetoric and performance, parang from rhetoric, art of persuasion. So, hindi lang naman basta pagko-convince ng mga tao. We also look at public address, alam mo yung kinikriticize namin yung mga speech ng mga tao. Of course, in a scientific manner, di ba? Tapos performance naman, ito kung gusto mo maging artista. Kasi tinitignan namin yung traditional roots ng theater, tapos tinitignan din namin yung mga social drama, kung ano ba yung mga pasabog na nilalabas sa public sphere, di ba? So, pwede ka rin mag-law, artista.
Very exciting. Punong-puno talaga. So, it's really nice that we have all of these different areas of concentrations and paths to take sa speech comm, diba? But I think as this is our first episode, baka our listeners and viewers are wondering what we mean by SPECAbout what?
Well, from the term what, kahit na so it's anything under the sun na, of course, meron siyang emphasis using the speech communication lens.
Tamang-tama. So speaking of our program, I think it's wise lang din for us to share our blended learning experiences for the semester. Honestly, it's been very, very draining kasi I have this day, I think it's Wednesday or Thursday, di ko sure, medyo clouded out ako. But from 11:30 to 1, I have an online class. And then 1 to 2:30 face-to-face. And then 2:30 to 4, online na naman. So ang nangyayari dito, even though online yung morning class ko, I have to go to UP na kaagad.
UP,
Kasi
oo.
wala akong buffer break hindi kakayanin ng grace
Oo.
period yon. So, ayun, sobrang hirap kasi pag nag-online class ako, tapos nag-a-attendance, narinig yung tambucho ng jeep na nakakahiya. So, super hassle talaga nitong blended learning kasi parang feeling ko sinama din ako sa blender dun sa pag-blended.
Alam mo, nakikita ko rin yan sa iba kong mga classmates and friends na merong online muna for the first hour, then right after the online class, ayun nga, ba face-to-face. So kapag meron silang report, hindi pwedeng nandun sila sa bahay nila, tapos biglang paano sila pupunta sa school for their F2F. So nasa corridor sila, pero good thing naman, may mga spaces sa school, pero it's still not, conducive. So parang mahirap pa rin, di ba, to look or to at least focus on your ACADS kung ganun talaga yung situation. And more than that, kung hindi pa kayo pinapakinggan ng admin with your calls. Kasi hindi naman students lang, di ba? Ang nahihirapan pag ganun.
Yeah, totoo. Kaya nga there are a lot of calls talaga for the admin to hear yung panawagan for Ligtas na Balik Eskwela. Kasi what's happening is parang yung system, it feels very wonky pa. Parang hindi pa siya super pulido, di ba, Zhina?
Parang bugs. Parang alam mo yung biglang, okay, mag-blended na muna tayo. Pero may online pa rin. Tapos, yung policies bumalik sa face-to-face policies. So parang, hindi naman ganun kadali mag-transition. So I think that's why it's important to be updated with the latest na kung ano ba yung mga calls natin. Kasi even if we have, similar experiences with the ongoing shift to Ligtas na Balik Eskwela, we still need time, as we know, di ba, living in the Philippines, mayroong learning crisis, economic inflation, Diyos ko, and inefficient commute or mass transport, talagang kahit sino maloloka, mapupunta dun sa blender kung nasan ka.
Actually, sobrang true. Tapos meron pa yung mandatory or ROTC daw. Tapos parang for college students. So sobra-sobra na talaga. It's really interesting din how all of these issues seem to be kind of on top of each other. Parang wala na talagang pahinga.
Sabay-sabay.
And parang, diba? Tapos parang, in a way, some of these new issues are popping up to distract you from the another issue talaga. So sobra-sobra na talaga. And I think this is where we come in as speech-com students, na ganito ba talaga yung mga nangyayari sa mundo, right?
Tapos the way we talk it, feeling ko our listeners would kind of notice na we talk it out very lightly, pero in every communication process, ang primary concern natin ay ang audience. That's why we want you guys to listen to this podcast na may intindihan niyo siya. Kaya naman, in line with that, we scoured through different students and non-students or non-speech-com majors for their misconceptions sa aming program.
And super duper exciting, and this is very, very timely kasi I feel like we definitely should debunk these misconceptions so that we can shed light on our program scope and also its strengths. Ano nga ba talagang speech-com, right?
I got you, Jco. Kasi naman, etong mini segment, di ba, magkakaroon tayo ng mini segment sa episode pa lang. And that will be called, ang sabi, is it a fact or a myth edition? Di ba? First episode pa lang, we're going to have this game na parang mas maintindihan lalo ng ating listeners what we are trying to tell them. And since we're going full face-to-face sa UP next semester, we need to practice ang ating pagiging witty at energetic.
Tama. Super exciting, and I hope next time we can also do these types of games live and face-to-face sa Palma Hall or wherever, diba? But nonetheless, I think our future freshies and future speech communication students can still benefit from our mini-game segment here in our podcast. Kaya naman for now, shout out to all students as well as yung mga UPCA applicants na lagi ko nakakasabay sa jeep. Wishing you all the best, but I hope that this segment can be for you as well.
Ayan, kaya kung nagtataka pa kayo or nagdadalawang isip kung iti-take nyo bang speech-com, eto na, sasagutin namin ang inyong mga confusion or misconceptions, diba? So, we've asked our fellow speech communication majors, aka our com-marites, online and in person, kung ano ba yung mga misconceptions nila before or ano yung mga naririnig nila from other people. At syempre, kinumbahin namin yan. So, etong ating mechanics. Jco, handa ka na ba?
Ready na ako sa ating mechanics.
Ayan. So, I will give the unsabi statement at si Jco ang kailangang humimay ng mga ito at bakit ito fact or bakit ito myth. So ayan, kung kayo guys, yung mga sa nakikinig dyan, pwede nyo rin siyang hulaan at malalaman nyo by the end of our statements kung tumpak nga ba ang mga sagot ninyo.
Tama. May points ba? May prize ba pag nanalo?
Ang prize ay enlightenment, ganon. Pero simulan na natin ang game para naman makuha na nila ang enlightenment na sinasabi natin with the first statement. So, ang sabi nila, tayo raw ay public speaking galore. Is it a fact or a myth?
Actually, ang statement na ito ay fact. But I want to clarify na even though it's a fact, hindi lang siya
Ayan.
basta public speaking na salita ka ng salita all the time. Because yes, under the rhetoric and performance track ng SpeechCom, matututunan mo yung iba't ibang means of argumentation, rhetorical theories, and public speaking like debate, diba? All that. But we're not just being honed with our public speaking and stage skills because our program also talks about interpersonal and instructional skills through research and theoretical methods of inquiry. Basically, that just means we're also pretty academic and heavy
Oo,
on
tama.
diba? So very well rounded. But as a whole, we also improve other skills like critical thinking and academic writing. And at the end of the day, it's a very, very solid choice of a program if you really want to get into it, right?
Oo. So parang kumbaga, pag sa public speaking, you don't just speak, pero meron talagang content yung sinasabi mo. And in speech communication, it's also encouraged to interact with your professor, with your classmates. So laging merong healthy discussion when it comes to your classes. So talagang public speaking galore siya, di ba? Pero, eto naman, feel ko madaming masushook dito or siguro hindi sila masushook, pero this is the common assumption when it comes to speech communication. Ang sabi nila, ang speech com daw ay parang mass com lang yan eh. So, Jco, is it a fact or a myth?
O, diba ito na yung tea, spill the tea. Actually, it is a myth. It is a myth. Kasi in mass communication, there's more of an emphasis on how information is transferred to larger audiences. Kumbaga, paano tina-transfer to sa iba't ibang medium or like iba't ibang channels, right? Whereas speech communication focuses on both the verbal and non-verbal cues para gumawa ng sariling meanings in different communication contexts. So, iba yung atake. Like both of them are communication disciplines, but very, very different in terms of attack.
Oo. Feel ko kasi mas famous yung mathcom, kaya madalas silang napapag-interchange or at least assume na ganun yung sa atin. But you know, from the word itself na math, talagang mass media yung inaatake ng speechcom. Whereas in speech communication, we look into different interpersonal, relationships, sabi mo, instructional, ganun, di ba? So, I remember nga our speech 156, 157, organizational
Yung
competence.
orgom,
Parang, orgom.
Last week sa
fun. What? Orgom last sem?
orgom last sem.
Nice. Ayun. So yun guys, we have also orgom and speechcom. So hindi lang talaga siya, it's communication or public speaking or galore, diba? Pero ito naman, tignan natin kung matitrigger ba ang ating fellow speech communication students. Ang sabi nila, puro dada ang speechcom. Jco, is it a fact or a myth?
Parang ito yung mga nakikita mo sa Freedom Wall na nakakairitang hot takes.
Oo.
It's a myth, obviously, because there's definitely a lot of substance sa SpeechCom. Like, as we've already mentioned, you study all sorts of disciplines. And if you become a speech communication graduate, napakadami mong fields na pwedeng puntahan. And there's a reason why Speech 30 is one of the most sought-after GEs. So if wala siyang substance, bakit lagi ang taas-taas ng demand for it, right? It's definitely something that I recommend people to try out. SpeechCom is very fun.
Yeah, true. Speech 30, parang hindi mo kasi siya magagamit lang in a certain area. So, kahit anong major mo right now, even if you're from STEM, you're from ABM, eventually you'll have to be able to master the skill of, at least talking to people in a professional way, or at least, yung strategies mo in convincing someone. So, I remember nga in our speech 132, I think that's, rhetorical criticism. So this is the first thing that our professor emphasized with us, na hindi lang tayo puro dada as students and speechcom as a whole. Kasi through the art of rhetoric, we're able to make sense of, material conditions, yung mga struktura sa society na continuously at systematically nag-o-oppress ng certain sectors. And generally, para maintindihan kung paano nga ba nila napapamukhang hindi naman sila nang o-oppress or paano nila na-deceive, kumbaga, yung constituents nila.
Exactly. And add ko lang na there's nothing wrong naman sa pagiging madaldal. I think the life of the party is always the person na madaldal. But beyond that, as speech communication students, we undergo rigorous training both in research and oral skills in order to eventually practice the theories that we often encounter in class. I remember yung isa kong prof, isa sa favorite profs ko, bawal sa kanya yung verbal fillers, yung like, and but. So,
Oo.
for a while there, I was very, very conscious about the way I would
Oo.
speak and aalisin ko talaga siya.
Yung fillers.
Ayun.
Well, buti, wala sa akin ngayon, but in high school, merong mga ganon. Kaya siguro, napagkakamalan din na we don't have a set career path after our stay in our college or in our major, lalo na kapag sa mga family gatherings na nakakailang tanong na nga sila sa akin kung ano ba daw yung gagawin ko after I graduate. So, about what, di ba? So, about what? So, speaking of snarky remarks on our career, anong career mo nun, di ba? Or anong gagawin mo after that? Teacher lang? HR lang? So, eto, fact ba to or myth?
I think it's somewhere in the middle kasi it's somehow a myth, but it's also, there's some bits of fact there. Kasi you can be an educator and be a corporate slave, as they say it, but hindi lang sila teacher lang or HR lang. Kasi sobrang laki ng application range ng mga speech communication majors. We have alums who become lawyers, become media enthusiasts, become journalists, HR people, business people, all of these show you how diverse speech communication is as a discipline. So it's actually very broad, and I think isa ito sa mga courses talaga, or like as with all courses, na hindi mo pwedeng i-box lang. Tama, di ba?
And that's the bottom line of this discussion. Na hindi lang tayo, not because hindi famous ang speechcom, eto lang tayo. And that all that we have for this segment.
Yes, so sobrang dami naming nasabi about what we study here. We definitely hope that you got some entering perspectives about what it's like to be a speechcom major. So as you said nga, there are a lot of misconceptions that permeate, big word, that really prevail kapag speechcom major ka, or when people look at you and think, ano nga ba yung speechcom na yan? But I think we can look into some of the academic texts that we read, but not super deep naman. Like for example, meron akong isang paper na nabasa. I think it was Marlier, who talked about speech communication being perceived as a disunified field. Kasi daw sobrang lawak. So parang walang unity o unity. Parang wala daw talaga siyang core identity as a discipline. But I think yung mga members ng speech communication discipline also, kind of played around with this and realized that it's not necessarily a weakness, but it can also be a strength. Kasi nga, as you said, wide yung sakop ng speechcom.
True yan, kasi nabanggit mo kanina yung different paths na pwedeng puntahan ng mga speech communication majors. So, yung question na gustong sagutin ng speech communication ay somewhat vague pa rin siya to other people. Kasi, yun na nga, totoo nga, madami nga kayong pwedeng puntahan na field na nabanggit natin. So, ano nga ba talaga yung speechcom? So, yun yung madalas na problema, or not really a problem, but tinatanong ng mga tao, or at least pati sa mga fellow speechcom majors na kasama natin na, sobrang jack of all trades natin. So what really is speechcom? So yung common understanding ng speech communication ay primarily about oral communication competency. Well, I think it's true naman na we do hone our oral skills and competencies. At dapat feeling ko, hindi natin siya tinitake as superficial lang kasi a lot of people don't know how important oral competency is in our real life. Or, diba? At saka other scholars think na oral competency being the discipline's specialization ay hindi enough or generally recognized as a disciplinary entity.
Actually, feeling ko, double-edged sword yun. Pero the reason why a lot of people or most people definitely need to increase yung oral competency nila is hindi porket ang laki ng expertise mo sa isang topic, alam mo na kung paano siya i-deliver.
Deliver.
Ito medyo controversial without naming names. Yung core, feeling ko alam naman to ng lahat, yung we are not that high, or like yung mga ganong statements na the peso is not weak, but the peso is weak because the dollar is strong. In an economic aspect, an economic point of view, I've heard from some of my friends na like business savvy or like econ savvy na they're parang medyo tama naman if you look
Tama
into
naman siya.
Like Southeast Asian currencies are also pretty, medyo shaky din. But
Oo.
yung messaging kasi nung speaker na yon was a bit shaky. Yung delivery niya, hindi ganun ka-convincing. Kasi it was too simplistic and hindi niya talaga ina-explain bakit ganun. Maybe if that kind of statement was delivered sa economic conference or like sa mga tao na
Good siya, oo.
good siya. Pero dahil dineliver kasi siya publicly, ano nangyari? Pinagtawanan siya ng mga tao, di ba? Kasi kulang siya sa nuance, so kumbaga parang hindi na contextualize yung ganung message. And I think
Oo.
that's exactly why speech communication is important as a discipline and kung bakit hindi naman necessarily weakness na iba't iba
Oo,
yung
weakness.
tinatakal. Kasi as a speech com major, ang dami-dami kong natutunan with regards not just to modulation of my voice, or even grammar, or even or the rhetorical perspective, but I also learn about relationships and learn about maybe even trying to be part of an organization like with Orcom, diba? So all of these different contexts are important kasi play along with our everyday life. Alam mo, bahagi
totoo.
talaga siya ng buhay natin. And I think we're very lucky that we are in a
True.
degree program na
Oo.
alam mo yun, parang bawat subject mo, makakapool ka o makakakuha ka
Pulot ka,
ng
oo.
contribution sa araw-araw mong buhay. Like, if your professor asks you to give an example, napakadami mong scenarios, di ba?
Oo.
Parang, ayun pala yun, meron pala yung underlying academic
Oo.
meaning, di ba?
Saka yung sinasabi nating oral competency, it's not just about pagsasalita, but it also has a lot to do with how you structure what you deliver to your audience, kung paano mo ba i-strategize yung information na ibibigay mo, and all of that. So, nung nabanggit mo nga rin na we also take into consideration relationships, the instructional world, dun mo makikita how it's not just about, for example, sa instructional world na just, magturo ka lang ng magturo. Pero madaming concepts na magiging effective for an educator. For example, to properly target their students, problems, or kung gusto mo naman mag-delve deeper into interpersonal issues, mas magkakaroon ka ng kamalayan on why your partner is acting that way, or kung ano nga ba yung certain causes ng, for example, ng pag-aawayan nyo ng partner mo, or kung paano mo lang i-approach properly and accordingly yung mga tao sa buhay mo, and of course in a more professional level. So feeling ko when it comes to speech communication, oral competency takes a lot of things, and a lot of people don't know about, hindi nila alam kung ano nga ba yung totoong nagagawa ng oral competency in their lives. So kaya naman kung ganun pa rin yung assumption nyo, listen until the end of our podcast or sa chikahan namin ni Jco, kasi mas may explain pa namin why speech com is important and how we look at different things in society.
Tama. And if you're still not convinced with the value of oral competency, I think there's still a lot more to love about speech com kasi nga cross-disciplinary field siya. So we've already talked about all of the different kinds of research that we do, the different areas of concentration. But as a whole, speech communication can indeed be used as a tool for uncovering different meanings in different communication contexts. So that being said, this is one example, and I think very, very timely. Kasi as students of SpeechCom, and in a general sense, mga estudyante talaga ng Pilipinas na nakakaranas ng iba't ibang problema, one of the most pressing issues that we are facing today is yung mga schools na hindi pa din 100% yung face-to-face kasi hindi pa nagkakaroon ng Ligtas na Balik Eskwela. And add on to that, meron pa ngang mandatory ROTC as mentioned kanina. So all of these different issues are definitely on the minds of students and nakaka-add talaga siya sa stress. Right?
So, as we know, students have been, kasi nabanggit mo na yung mandatory ROTC, pati yung LBE na campaigns, di ba, na isinusulong na matagal na. As we know, students have been forced to shift to the digital platform, biglaan na lang noon, as a means of, learning. So from our discussion earlier, it has been expressed na itong online learning nga is not effective, which is why there are calls for Ligtas na Balik Eskwela. So ano nga ba itong mga different underlying issues na makikita natin with our current situation sa dalawang issues na to?
Actually, sa Ligtas na Balik Eskwela, a lot of people tend to think na if you're at home, you're 100% safe. And actually, it's a very, very, gets ko naman, but it's also kind of a privileged way to look at things. Kasi a lot of homes aren't particularly safe for some children. Like,
sila conducive.
Besides saying hindi conducive, like a lot of kids tend to become exposed to things like violence or even child labor, lalo na dun sa mga below the poverty line. And I
Domestic
think,
abuse.
yeah, domestic abuse and all of that. So I think importante yung pagbabalik sa eskwela in person kasi for a lot of people, schools also become their safe spaces kasi they're allowed to be themselves, diba? Like,
Themselves, yeah.
yeah, exactly. It's like one of the things then is yung LGBT community. Like I'm sure a lot of people who are in the closet aren't very comfortable at home,
Sa
especially with
school nila.
yeah, but also at home, if you're in a conservative family, school tends to become a safer space, not
Their safe
necessarily
space,
100%. Kasi
Mm-mm.
you have friends there eh. And you take that away and it takes away very, very important developmental aspects. Lalo na kung grade school ka or high school na nandun ka sa point in life na you really, really want to socialize, diba? So I think that's one of the reasons why importante talaga magkaroon ng ligtas na balik eskwela. But on top of that, it's been like over 2 years na since the pandemic has started. Diba? So,
2020.
2020. And at this point, that should have been enough time for schools to have prepared their premises na for the pandemic, diba?
Tapos, more than the issue on siguro yung safer spaces for LGBT na saka lang nararamdaman yung totoong sila when they go to school, pati rin yung mga, for example, people who don't really feel like safe in their homes or hindi sila comfortable to just, spend the rest of their days sa mga bahay nila. So when they go to school, there's a sense of comfort, even though syempre na-stress ka sa requirements mo. There's a sense of comfort kasi andun yung friends mo. And I think it's very important then to look at how social interactions are very beneficial when it comes to students, lalo na yung mga siguro puro aral lang. Of course, they're expected to study kasi nga estudyante sila. Pero yung siguro human touch or physical connection mo with your peers, for example, is also what helps you survive the day, for example. So kung stress ka na nga sa bahay nyo with all your chores, siguro mag-alaga ka ng kapatid mo, tapos stress ka pa sa akads mo. So you don't actually have the privilege to at least draw a line na kung ano ba yung struggle mo in life, for example. So,
wala ng boundaries.
Oo, wala ng boundary. I feel like a lot of us already experienced that, lalo na kung yung study area mo is in your room. So, hindi mo na mahanap kung ano nga ba yung pahinga sa pag-aaral. So, it's really difficult, hindi lang for college students na super serious na mag-aral, kundi pati sa mga kids na nawawalan ng kalaro, at least, in just forming their sense of self, yung identity nila, or at least having the sense of comfort from other people.
Kaya nga parang some people are also calling for an educational crisis kasi it's not just the Philippines but also the rest of the globe that are experiencing these things. But on top of that, yung Pilipinas mismo, nagkakaroon din siya ng issues of its own, like yung mga napapasarang schools, diba? Like, for instance, yung mga private schools na kailangan pang i-absorb ng iba't iba pang schools yung students nila kasi nagsasara sila kasi they can't sustain operations because of the pandemic, diba? Super, super difficult.
Alam mo pati UP, for example, let's contextualize it to UP. Kasi diba recently, if you guys, our listeners, are watching the news or nagbabasa kayo ng news, Senator Pia Cayetano actually questioned SUCs. Of course, they're funded by the government and people's taxes. So why are we still holding blended classes sa mga campuses natin, or we are not yet in full force, meron naman daw tayong quote-unquote budget. So including UP, we are called out, di ba? Makamuntik tayong makancel ng ating senador, di ba? During the hearing noong 2023 budget, yung meeting na yon. So parang, I think it's a necessary call for UP and SUCs, di ba? Kasi this has put, I think, pressure to UP admin to at least execute F2F classes na talaga. With, of course, dapat natitignan pa rin nila yung safety and of course yung learning quality na need nilang ibigay.
True. Pero despite all of that, alam mo, kulang pa din talaga yung pag-prioritize sa welfare ng students. Kasi hindi naman porket we want na bumalik ka agad sa school is sasalpak na ng lahat ng estudyante dyan kasi syempre magkakasakit, diba? But also, kulang din talaga sa prioritization. Kasi if you look at some of the news headlines recently with our education secretary, diba? Yung mandatory ROTC pa yung naunang prioritize, diba? So as the educational secretary, I think Vice President Sara Duterte really has a lot of things to prioritize or look into pa before
Oo.
getting into things like mandatory ROTC? Kasi I haven't heard any of her plans specifically for Ligtas na Balik Eskwela yet, besides yung nabalitaan ko na required na atang public schools to have classes this
Classes,
SEM
oo.
kaagad, di ba? Parang wala pa akong masyadong naririnig regarding protocols much compared dun sa push niya talaga for ROTC. And I think,
ROTC.
yeah, alarming din kasi yung ROTC kasi if they're fast-tracking it right now, medyo
Oo.
hindi ako kampante na hindi mangyayari ulit yung nangyari like over 21 years ago
Oo.
when one of the, I think there was a student from a university in Manila na namatay kasi of
Oo,
ROTC,
because of
ROTC
ROTC.
violence, diba? So, pagkita mo na yung ROTC, nakakabit talaga siya sa violent nature. And kumbaga
Oo.
parang repressive siya eh. So, I don't really see the urgency to bring it
Oo,
back.
urgency,
So,
true.
diba? Parang medyo
And
weird.
especially na kakaupo niya as an education secretary. Unang-una, tignan natin if she really has the credibility to be an education secretary in the first place. So, nung shinog off na lang yon ng ang dami-daming tao, okay, so maybe let's give her the benefit of the doubt. Tapos biglang hihingi siya ng 100 billion budget for
Yeah. Yung
education.
confidential funds pa yun.
Yeah. Oh my God. That's it. Tapos, biglang makikita mo sa policies niya na push for mandatory ROTC right after or at least in the middle of transitioning or in solving a learning crisis na hindi lang siguro professionals ang magsasuffer in the long run, but of course, yung mga batang hindi nakakapag-aral talaga. So, unang-una, tulad ng nabanggit mo, walang urgency, tapos hindi niya sinasagot yung calls ng tao and yung totoong problema na kinakaharap natin, which is yung learning crisis na ang daming layers.
Yeah, and I also feel like parang ROTC is being pushed for in the guise of nationalism, but in reality, it's synonymous siya sa parang trying to foster blind obedience.
Blind
Or
obedience,
like,
yeah.
Diba? Parang, kasi a lot of the criticism aimed at like people or students from our university is that we tend to criticize a lot of people, like a lot of admin related platforms. Pero I think it's important that, Filipinos become critical thinkers. And if they're trying to push ROTC as the antidote to all of the so-called complaints na galing from students, medyo alarming siya kasi you can see that the government doesn't seem to really try to figure out why we're actually complaining. And if you think of it, yung pag-impose ng mandatory ROTC, is hindi talaga siya directly for the benefit of solving the crisis, but rather, kumbaga sa admin, to take less heat and possibly just, fan the fires, kumbaga, or parang lessen the noise, diba?
I-tame nila.
Yeah, exactly. I think, just in general, it's important na kung communication major ka or speech communication major, you really should have the capacity to apply yung mga naaaral mo sa classroom. Kasi a lot of these things that you study, you actually see at play. If you just turn on the TV, makikita mo yung rhetorical devices na ginagamit lang mga tao like Sara Duterte, and you can see how effective they are, diba? To the public, diba?
Speaking of yung how effective they are, parang ganyan kasi yung rhetoric nila even from the past administration. A lot of Filipinos in general subscribe to that strong rhetoric. Kaya siguro parang hindi sila ganon ka-affected on why they're really pushing hard with mandatory ROTC. And if their goal at the end of the day is to instill nationalism with Filipinos, I think mas magandang tumbukin nila yung issue of nationalism into making our education system mass-oriented, anti-colonial. Diba? Kasi a lot of our works nga or yung mga references natin in school are still based on Western ideologies, even how we have viewed society, diba? Mass media and all of that. Colonial pa rin siya. And it's not scientific at more of commercialized pa yung educational system natin or how we are as mag-aaral or as schools do
products.
their product pa rin tayo ng ganong type of system. So, di ba, ang daming problema when it comes to education, our system, di ba? So, we kind of don't get talaga why there's a weight on pushing for this at hindi na lang nila i-prioritizing safe resumption of classes. So, maybe we're not saying naman na there's no absolute benefit at all of mandatory ROTC. Maybe some people even subscribe to that logic. Pero what we're trying to say is that it's always a problem solution mismatch. And I feel like we cannot afford that kind of wasting time kung ganito na yung nararanasan ng mga Pilipino in the pandemic na magtatatlong taon na siya.
Yeah. So ayun na nga, after everything na napag-usapan natin, punong-puno tayo ng pabaon sa ating listeners. Hopefully. But
Hopefully.
it would also help then if we leave them with a little bit something more pabaon, which is why I'm asking candidate number 7, Zhina,
Wow.
please pick your card.
Yes.
And here is your question. How did speech communication shape you as an individual, and how did it influence your outlook in society? Diba?
Wow, thank you, Steve Jco. Pero thank you for that wonderful question. Pero in a more serious manner, or para mas ma-feel ninyo yung pagka-touch ng speech communication into my life or our lives rather. Feeling ko, it's kind of cliche, pero speech communication made me more critical, but more critical in a sense na you really look at the different sectors in society and how the different systems in our society affects them. Like, for example, hindi mo na lang titignan yung basta-bastang isang ad or isang speech as merely an ad or a speech. You look at how maybe that ad oppresses women with regards to beauty standards, or maybe how that speech kind of undermines women's rights, or diba, yung mga policy na nakikita natin in society. With the use of speechcom, nakikita natin how, for example, it's very performative, or how it doesn't target, for example, their audience, or hindi siya parang, alam mo yun, nakakatulong in a sense, or at least why it's oppressive to some other people.
Yeah.
So that influenced my outlook in society, na parang hindi na lang ako basta-basta naniniwala to other people. Feeling ko, kind of an overthinker effect of, speechcom.
Yeah.
Pero it helps you to be more firm in your, for example, mas mapuniri.
Sigurista,
That's the word,
naging
mapuniri.
sigurista ka, yeah.
Pero syempre, let's throw back the question to our candidate number 1. So ikaw naman.
Siguro, I think ako, in general, I just like to say na I became more empathetic as a speech major. Kumbaga parang, if I look at a situation, I realize na the way that the person behaves is the result of like something in their life that's happening. Kumbaga parang, medyo big word to, pero one of the words that I remember the most is yung exigence or problem. I think yun yung pinaka naisip kong factor lagi when a person does something these days. So instead of just becoming judgmental kagad, I tend to look into that and I try to be more empathetic. And besides sa mga nasabi mo, I think yun yung biggest change in how I view society. I just try to be more empathetic.
Kasi true yun, nakikita natin as speech communication students that everybody has something going on with their lives. That's why they act this way, they communicate this way. Diba? Na parang laging may salik when it comes to how they react into certain situations in their lives, diba? Kaya naman, feeling ko it's nice if a lot of people have access to these kinds of maybe lessons, or at least mas magkaroon sila ng opportunity, or maging inclusive man lang yung pag-aaral ng mga ganitong stuff. Kaya naman, kung gusto natin gawin yon at mas ibahagi natin sa mga kabataan yung edukasyon na dapat na para sa kanila, we have to be able to amplify our cause for Ligtas sa Balik Eskwela, at huwag nating i-prioritize yung mga polisiya tulad ng, mandatory ROTC.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think definitely this should be a wake-up call for people to realize na hindi lang to basta-basta complaints. There are a lot of repercussions and effects na mangyayari if these kinds of repressive policies yung patuloy na mapupush, and if wala pa din tayong safe face-to-face classes, right?
So everyone, that's how we analyze and that's how we look at different issues in our society as speech communication students. So mapa-instructional, interpersonal, rhetoric, or performance man yan, it really has an impact on how we view society, and it can help others understand more kung ano nga ba etong mga buzzword and issues na siguro
Yeah.
nababasa nila sa news lagi. So, I think kung may mga questions kayo, you can just message our Facebook pages or our Twitter or Instagram ng ating org. So what's our org? It's UP SPECA. So kung gusto nyo mag-tune in and ask us some questions with regard to these different issues, you can go to facebook.com/UP SPECA. You can also go to Twitter. We are at UP SPECA. And same with IG. We are at UP SPECA.
Ayan. So, Zhina, baka gusto mo naman i-plug ang yung sariling social media accounts for the
Para
club.
naman sa mga gustong mag-follow sa akin on my Instagram account, I am at Zhina Latupan. So for Twitter, I am at Zhina Ilan. So I think we can just put that below description box or in the
Wow.
description of our material, di ba? Ikaw,
Exactly.
Jco, baka naman gusto mong ibahagi ang iyong snippets ng buhay.
Sa Twitter, I'm at JcoDNL and at Instagram, I'm JerichoDNIEL. Ayan. So, I think that's it. I'm very, very happy to have shared all of these different issues with you guys. And once again, I'm Jco, everyone's favorite donut dude and geeky extraordinaire from UP SPECA.
And I'm Zhina, minsan Zina, ang inyong resident Janita Charmer from UP SPECA. And this has been Debunking Myths and Misconceptions. So guys, tune in again for our next episode only here on SPECAbout What?
Bye, guys.
Bye,
Bye
guys.
to our viewers. Thank you so much for listening. See you in the next episode.